Florida, one of the most popular tourist destinations in the country, lush with tropical weather, hot beaches, and thick, murky swamps. While it seems like the perfect place to visit, I bet you never knew that the Sunshine State would hold a dark past. Let's go back in time for a minute. Various Native American groups have inhabited Florida for at least 14,000 years. In 1513, Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon became the first known European to make landfall, calling the region La Florida for its lush greenery and the Easter season. Florida subsequently became the first area in the continental U.S. to be permanently settled by Europeans, with the Spanish colony of St. Augustine, founded in 1565, being the oldest continuously inhabited city. Florida was repeatedly contested by Spain and Great Britain before being ceded to the U.S. in 1819. It was admitted as the 27th state on March 3, 1845. Florida was also the principal location of the Seminole Wars, roughly around 1816 to 1858, and the longest and most extensive of the Indian Wars in U.S. history. The state had seceded from the Union on January 10, 1861, and became of the 7 original Confederate states. After the Civil War, Florida was restored to the Union on June 25, 1868. With this long and colorful history, Florida has now gained its own unique personality in the United States, including some of the unusual, even frightening stories. We're going to go ahead and visit some of these legends and learn a little bit more about the wonderful Sunshine State and the history you may not have learned in school. Watching me tell a story is great, but you know what's better? Listening to my stories while playing Hero Wars. Meet Rufus, not my pet, but one of the many heroes you can level up in the amazing game Hero Wars. Hero Wars is my new favorite mobile game for Android and iOS. If you enjoy a good fantasy RPG that's jam-packed with action and snazzy online features, this one's for you. I personally hate games with short and weak campaigns, but Hero Wars boasts a staggering 130 plus missions. Not only is the world immersive, but the story captivates you, and when you're not slaying your opponents in PvP in the arena with unique heroes and skills, you can be duking it out on expeditions and upgrading your items and artifacts. Or if you're a lover of fighting huge monstrous bosses, then the Outland is the place for you. I'm an old school Final Fantasy player, and games like this are simply right up my alley. But if all that's not crazy enough for you, there are over 100 million players who join in all over the world. Do you think you got what it takes? Join the game now and get a super chest with a secret hero, as well as 600 emeralds and 30,000 gold. Scan this QR code or download the game from the link below the video. See you in game. Located in Hardee County, just southeast of Tampa, is the town of Wakulla, known as the cucumber capital of the world. It is in this little town that the legend of Bloody Bucket Bridge came to be. The location of the bridge is on a section of Route 64 that runs between Zolfo Springs and Avon Park. The road used to be called Reinhardt or Reinhardt Pass Road, and the story begins somewhere around 200 years ago. Some versions of the story claim the woman was a slave, while other versions claim the woman was already freed and settled in Wakulla as a free woman with her husband. Either way, the story goes this woman was the town midwife, delivering hundreds of babies in her time. After a while, she became concerned that parents in town were having more children than they could support. This, paired with the haunting memory of her own children being taken away from her, she began to smother them, claiming to the parents it was a stillbirth. She would then, depending on the version of the story, either burying the bodies beneath the town bridge, or according to others, carrying their remains to the bridge and dumping them into the river. All versions of the story are consistent with the midwife carrying the bodies to the bridge in a bucket, and after many were disposed of, people then became suspicious and refused to let her deliver any more babies. The midwife was then driven mad, and she spent the rest of her life crazed, living out in the Florida swamps, screaming that she was haunted by the ghost of babies. She would sit in her home and listen to their ghastly cries. She then began to see that her buckets would mysteriously fill up with blood. She was having to go to the river to empty the buckets over and over again, but they just kept on refilling mysteriously. On her last visit to the river, the midwife, exhausted by her excursions, lost her footing, falling into the river where she had dumped so many and drowned herself. The river is said to have run red with blood for days, after giving this spot its horrific and distinctive name. Locals say the river will still run red when the moon is full, and some witnesses have heard the cries of disembodied infants nearby, just as the midwife had. It is also told that on some nights, the sound of the midwife's spirit still struggling and splashing in the river can be heard. Some who doubt the legitimacy of the story claim the name Bloody Bucket Bridge comes from a bar that was located nearby in the 1930s and the 1940s called the Bloody Bucket. I'll let you be the judge on this one. The Florida skunk ape is known by many names: the swamp cabbage man, the stink ape, and the skunk ape, just to name a few. This legendary creature has been reported to inhabit Florida, North Carolina, and Arkansas. The skunk ape gets its name from its bitter odor comparable to that of a skunk, and is said to be a byproduct of living alongside alligators and other swamp inhabitants. The skunk ape is a bipedal ape-like creature that stands up to around 7 feet tall, weighing over 400 pounds, smaller than its northern cousin Bigfoot, and is supposedly covered in streaked reddish-brown fur. This creature has been a staple in Florida legend since its first inhabitants took up residency there. Seminole culture even has stories of an elusive, foul-smelling, physically powerful creature. Their name for it roughly translates to cannibal giant. In fact, a Florida newspaper from 1818 reported a story of a man-sized monkey that would actually loot food stores and stalk fishermen along the shoreline. There have also been hundreds of alleged sightings of the Florida skunk ape well over the years. And in fact, in the 1940s, the small community of Barden in Putnam County, Florida, had a number of alleged sightings of a hairy, ape-like creature called the Barden Booger. In the 1970s, 2 Palm Beach County Sheriff deputies named Marvin Lewis and Ernie Milner reported that an ape-like creature stalked them through a grove before they shot at it with their firearms. Now, they reported following a trail of footprints where they recovered hair snagged on a barbed wire fence line that had been actually pushed down. Several Everglades wildlife tour bus operators and their guests have reported alleged sightings on their own. In July of 1997, one of these operators, David Sheely, reported that wildlife stands baited with lima beans had been raided, and he noticed strange tracks surrounding them. He baited several locations and reported skunk ape sightings soon after. Everglades tour operators Steve Goodbread, Dow Rowland, and their guests reported skunk ape sightings themselves, and both operators claimed that a hoax was highly unlikely considering the 100-degree weather and high humidity, and the rural location alone would make it torture enough for anyone to spend any time in a costume looking like that. In 1997, a photograph of a dark, upright figure in the swamp was taken by a fire control district chief, Vince Dewar. He claims this photo is of a skunk ape. He reported observing the creature crossing the road, so he stopped his car to capture a photograph. And within 2 weeks, over 50 people reported alleged sightings of a hairy creature within the Big Cypress National Preserve. Questionable photographs of an alleged skunk ape were then sent to the Sarasota County Sheriff's Department in 2000. One of these photographs depicted a large, hairy ape-like creature and was accompanied by an actual letter. The author of the letter claimed to be an elderly woman who reported the creature had been stealing apples from her back porch near I-75. Upon surprising the creature with a camera, she was worried that it was an escaped orangutan from the zoo, and that it might actually harm her family. The inspected photos were dubbed the skunk ape. There is an official skunk ape research headquarters in Ochopee, where researchers can collect and investigate reports of swamp ape sightings. Then there's Spook Hill, located in Lake Wales, Florida. On a stretch of road in Lake Wales is a hill with a rather peculiar name, Spook Hill. This hill has such a reputation and receives so many visitors. The nearby elementary school was named after it even. It is at this hill that visitors and their vehicles will simply defy gravity. Patrons will drive their cars to the hill, put their car neutral, and amazingly, the car will begin to coast uphill. Many believe this is due to a legend that dates far back to when natives occupied the land. There was a village located near the hill that was repeatedly attacked by a supposed monster alligator. The chief of the natives was a great warrior and took it upon himself to defend his people and his land. The chief then battled the monster gator to the death, coming out victorious. The battle was said to be so great that a small lake was a result of the clash. The chief, upon his own death years later, was buried on the north side of the hill. Then, during pioneer times, mail riders discovered their horses would struggle while traveling down the hill rather than up it. This is where the Spook Hill name originated. Later, as motor vehicles became more and more common, the road was paved, but the cars would coast up the hill. Many began to wonder if this breaking of the laws of gravity is due to the monster alligator, still somehow seeking revenge, or is it possibly the great warrior chief still trying to protect his land? Another legend surrounding Spook Hill is that of a Florida pirate by the name of Captain Sarsaparilla. Teniente Vanilla was Captain Sarsaparilla's aide, and the two pirates decided to dock their ship permanently and retired in Lake Wales, Florida in 1511. The two spent their retirement whale fishing and living a rather comfortable life, and according to the legend, Captain Sarsaparilla passed away first and was given a Davy Jones's locker burial at the bottom of North Lake Wales. A short time later, Teniente Vanilla also died and was buried at the location of what is now known as Spook Hill. Then, in 1926, a car was parked directly on the grave of Vanilla, specifically on his chest. It is believed that the weight of the car was the same of 15 men. In agony, the spirit of Vanilla called out to his old friend in life, Captain Sarsaparilla, and the captain's ghost pushed the car off of Vanilla's chest, now forever disturbing the once peaceful ghost. Some do not believe these legends at all, and attribute these strange occurrences at Spook Hill as that of a gravity hill. A gravity hill optical illusion presents visitors with the feeling of driving uphill when they are truly going down. Robert Eugene Otto was a boy who grew up in the Key West under the care of a nanny who practiced voodoo, and in 1906 she gave him a gift, a one-of-a-kind handmade by the Steiff Company of Germany around the turn of the century, 40-inch tall doll stuffed with wood wool and wearing a sailor outfit, once carried painted elements much like those of a gesture. Robert decided to name his doll his own name and chose himself to be called Gene going forward. Now, Gene regarded Robert the doll as his best friend and talked to him constantly, even whispering secrets to him. Gene, who was caught misbehaving, would often shift blame, pointing to the doll and saying, "I didn't do it, Robert did." Friends and family thought nothing of the boy playing with his doll, until they became suspicious when they believed he could hear the doll talking back to Gene. It was not just the family that thought this doll peculiar either, because neighbors even claimed they saw Robert the doll looking down at them from the top window of its home. Later on in life, Gene grew up to be a renowned artist. He had studied art in New York and Paris, and while he was gone, Robert the doll stayed at home, 534 Easton Street, with his parents. And in Paris, Gene was married, and the couple then returned to his childhood home in 1930, where Robert the doll still remained. Upon arriving home, he continued his art career, though he was often seen as eccentric. Gene even went on to design the gallery at the Fort East Martello Museum, and his plans to make his own home a museum, complete with a wax impression of the artist's hands as the central point. However, this dream was never reached. Still, his home had become known as the Artist House, and stories of the doll's mysterious conduct became common with those who met the doll after Gene's death in 1974. Residents reported hearing footsteps in the attic room above them, and once, even a plumber heard a strange giggling when he was working in the Artist House, turning to find the doll had moved across the room on its own. A reporter by the name of Malcolm Ross once even visited that doll and said this: "It was like a metal bar running down my back. At first, when we walked through the door, the look on his face was like a little boy being punished. It was as if he was asking himself, 'Who are these people in my room, and what are they going to do to me?'" A friend then told Ross the backstory of the doll, with another visitor commenting on how Gene must have been a fool. Ross then noticed Robert the doll's facial expression changed to that of disdain. There was some kind of intelligence there. "The doll was listening to us," he had said. And after Gene's death in 1974, a woman by the name of Myrtle Reuter purchased the Otto home. She then became Robert's companion and kept him when she moved to Von Pfister Street 6 years later. And in 1994, she donated Robert to the Fort East Martello Museum, claiming he moved around her house on his own and was haunted. Myrtle died a few months later when Robert the doll arrived at the museum. Staff noticed a shift in energies, and initially, Robert was not put on display, but once people heard about his new residence, they would come to the museum in an attempt to see him. And finally, Robert the Doll was given his own display. It was here that cameras and electronic devices soon began to fail. Letters began arriving for Robert the Doll, many apologizing for their disrespectful behavior in his presence and asking to be forgiven. Robert can still be found at the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, but visitors are encouraged to ask the doll for permission before taking his photo. Otherwise, cameras have been known to malfunction. Many still wonder what it is that had given Robert the Doll a seemingly life on its own. Was it voodoo? Was some other type of energy given to him, or was he just a misunderstood doll with a playful spirit? Maybe it was the spirit of his former owner, Gene, who wanted to stay with his childhood companion forever. At 428 Green Street in Key West, Florida, sits a yellow two-story building called Captain Tony's Saloon, supposedly the oldest bar in Key West. This is where legendary writer Ernest Hemingway spent most of his evenings. It was at Captain Tony's Saloon where well-known singer Jimmy Buffett got his start, playing for tips and beers, an experience he later described in the song Last Mango in Paris. The establishments of their celebrity patrons include Truman Capote, Bob Dylan, and even John F. Kennedy and Harry Truman, among others. Most Key West visitors know that Captain Tony's Saloon was the original location of the famous Sloppy Joe's Bar. When first constructed in 1852, the building at 428 Green Street was an ice house that later became the city's morgue. Many incarnations followed, becoming first a telegraph station, a cigar factory, a bordello, a gay bar, and several speakeasies specializing in gambling, women, and bootleg rum. Between 1933 and 1938, a local named Joe Russell operated Sloppy Joe's, and it became Ernest Hemingway's favorite place to drink. The writer became so attached to Sloppy Joe's that when the bar moved half a block down after a rent disagreement, Hemingway insisted on having the urinal. He was the judgment that his hard-earned money paid for it. The urinal can still be viewed at the Hemingway house, where it remains as a cat trough. Eventually, a local charter boat captain, Tony Terracino, turned it into Captain Tony's Saloon. He understood the historical importance of the building and was understanding enough to maintain various elements. At the very center of the saloon grows a huge tree that disappears through a hole in the roof. This is the infamous hanging tree from which the branches of which convicted pirates and murderers were strung up and hung. Their ghosts are still said to haunt the place. And it's also rumored the bar sits atop a well that's full of holy water. Next to the establishment's pool table, exposed in the cement, is the grave marker of Elvira Edmonds that was discovered under the floor, along with the skeletal remains of dozens of people during renovation in the 1980s. These are believed to have come from the time when the building was a morgue. There is yet another grave of one Reba Sawyer, located at the foot of the hanging tree. The legend goes that Reba was cheating on her husband, having secret meetings with another man at Captain Tony's Saloon. Her husband found out about the infidelity only after his wife's death, and it is said that he was sent into a rage upon discovery of this information and pulled her gravestone from the cemetery, dumping it inside the bar, saying, "This is where she wanted to be, so this is where she will stay." Mysterious events have been reported over the years, including ghostly voices in the bathroom stall doors that open, close, and lock seemingly by themselves. Cassadaga, Florida owns the proud title of Psychic Capital of the World, but there is another much more sinister claim to fame than just the odd number of psychics inhabiting the town. In a cemetery bordering Cassadaga and Lake Helen is what locals call the Devil's Chair. The Devil's Chair looks unassuming to most. It is just a brick and mortar bench, but according to many accounts, if an unopened beer is left at the chair, by morning it will be empty. Sometimes the beer can won't even be opened. The contents somehow drained anyway. Many believe it is the devil himself that enjoys the beverages left out for him, because it is he who built the bench in the first place. Each night at midnight, the devil returns to the lounge in his chair, and the legend of the Devil's Chair does not end there. Some have said that while sitting there in the chair, they have heard voices murmuring, only to stop when they have unseated themselves. Others have said the devil whispers evil ideas into your ear, evil things that will haunt you until your dying day. Doubters claim that the real story goes back to a man who lost his wife, a quick death and unexpected death, back in the 1920s. The wife was buried in the cemetery, and the husband would walk there each day to visit his wife and sit beside her grave. The man had horrible arthritis in his legs, and walking was hard on him, so he built what is known as the Devil's Chair as a permanent place to sit with his wife. A very different story, and a sweeter story compared to what brings so many visitors to this cemetery. Is it the spirit of the man enjoying a beer with his wife that is draining these beverages nightly? Or is it a thirsty prince of darkness enjoying gifts left for him at his chair? In 1889, Elizabeth Bessie Budd Graham was buried in the Old City Cemetery in Tallahassee, the oldest public cemetery in the city. The 23-year-old was a wife and mother, and yet on her tombstone is among the most elaborate in the cemetery. It is surrounded by a stone wall featuring large granite vases and sports a huge monument adorned with sculpted feathers, ivy, and a cross inside of a crown. This grave is peculiar because of the time of Bessie's death. Wooden grave markers were the norm, making this shrine a very odd and expensive piece. It is also unknown who paid for the elaborate setup, and there's a legend about how she bewitched a wealthy man, having him fall in love with her, and the two were wed. Upon her early death, he wanted to commemorate her with the most elaborate stone in the cemetery. Many believe there are clues at her gravesite that point to Bessie living her life as a witch. These include that Bessie was born in October, the month of Halloween, and also, the grave is the only one facing to the west. Contrary to Christian tradition, the tombstone also contains an unusual epitaph adapted from Edgar Allan Poe's Lenore. Broken is the golden bowl, the spirit flown forever. Let the bell toll, a saintly soul floats on the Stygian river. Come, let the burial rite be read, the funeral song be sung, an anthem for the queenliest dead that died so young, a dirge for her, the doubly dead, and that she died so young. Academics of the supernatural say the passage is full of clever hints. Broken in the bowl refers to slaying of a vampire, and the lines, the spirit flown forever, and a saintly soul floats on the Stygian river, are said to mean that a witch's spirit cannot cross the river of death, and is trapped somewhere between life and death. According to practitioners of witchcraft, who often visit the grave, the Stygian River is the Styx River of Greek mythology, where souls of the dead were actually carried across the river Styx to the lower world. Others refer to the queenliest dead as the meaning that she was the queen of the dead. Doubly dead specifically refers to witchcraft in that a witch can only be dead once, she's killed twice. Despite all the menacing accusations, researchers have found no wickedness to Bessie's life. The Bob Graham Sunshine Skyway Bridge, often referred to as the Sunshine Skyway Bridge or simply the Skyway, is a cable-stayed bridge spanning the lower Tampa Bay, connecting St. Petersburg, Florida to Terracea. The current Sunshine Skyway opened in 1987 and is the second bridge, that name, on the site. It was designed by Fagan Mueller Engineering Group and built by the American Bridge Company, and is considered a symbol of Florida. The four-lane bridge carries Interstate 275 and US Route 19, passing through several counties. The original bridge opened in 1954. This bridge is not only famous for its status as an iconic symbol of Florida, but also of its misfortune. Two completely different tragedies occurred near the bridge just months apart in 1980. The first being the Blackthorn, which was a 180-foot buoy tender that docked in the Tampa Bay. When attempting to leave the port in late January, the Blackthorn found itself in a gruesome accident, colliding with a tanker called the Capricorn. As it was floating in the bay, the ships were unable to make contact via radio to signal that they were passing, had left the deck and left a junior officer in charge. When the Capricorn blew two short whistles to communicate that they needed to pass starboard to starboard, the inexperienced officer did not understand. The Blackthorn attempted to evade the oncoming Capricorn, however, the two ships collided. The impact, miraculously, didn't cause too much damage. However, the Capricorn's anchor got stuck in the side of the Blackthorn's hull. The ships began to move apart, and the Capricorn pulled the Blackthorn over until she capsized. 23 Coast Guard officers lost their lives in the waters near the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, trying to help the two vessels. Just a few months later, on May 9th, John Lero was piloting the Summit Venture. Lero was driving the ship when a sudden storm rolled in. The storm carried with it heavy rains and massive wind gusts, causing Lero to lose control of his ship. It then collided with two of the bridge supports, causing an enormous chunk of the bridge roadway to break away, falling into the stormy waters below. Vehicles, unable to stop, began plunging 150 feet off the bridge into the bay below. 35 unexpected passengers fell to their watery graves. The damaged bridge was eventually demolished and hauled away, making way for the new bridge that is seen today. The Sunshine Skyway Bridge continues to be a spectacle of catastrophic events, and even after its rebuilding, many select the iconic bridge as the place for suicides. In fact, records show us that 248 people alone have jumped to their deaths from the bridge. It is known as one of the deadliest bridges in the entire country. And with all the death and heartbreak and tragedy and catastrophe, it comes as no surprise that the Sunshine Skyway Bridge is known as one of the most haunted spots in Tampa. Drivers have reported seeing beautiful blonde hitchhikers on the bridge. Caring citizens have stopped their cars to help a woman, assuming she's one of the many attempting to commit suicide from the bridge. When they pick her up, she begins to cry as the car approaches the top of the span. But when the driver turns around to ask what's wrong, the woman has vanished. And last today is the Riddle House. This is an old Edwardian house located in Palm Beach County, Florida. The house itself was built in West Palm Beach, Florida in 1905 by some of Henry Flagler's hotel construction workers, originally known as Gatekeeper's Cottage. The house was home to the groundskeeper of Woodlawn Cemetery. By 1920, the house became privately owned by Carl Riddle, a city manager and superintendent of West Palm Beach. He is the namesake of the house. The house has also been used as a funeral parlor, cemetery office, and even a dormitory. It is believed that this house is one of the most haunted places in all of Florida state. In fact, one of the earliest paranormal incidents happened after an argument between a cemetery worker named Buck and someone from the town. A fight ensued and Buck was killed. And soon after, Buck was seen wandering the cemetery and was even seen at the cottage. Once Riddle took ownership of the house, it is said that the paranormal events only there increased. A worker named Joseph, who had financial and domestic problems, hung himself in the attic of Riddle House. One theory states that Joseph was being accused of stealing and that the feelings of anger and despair caused him to take his own life. After this tragic event, the Riddle family and their employees began to hear noises. These included distant conversations, strange knocking, and something that sounded like chains being dragged. His workers left because of these disturbances, and Carl Riddle's family eventually left as well. Other organizations tried to use the house, but the strange noises finally drove them out. Even Palm Beach Atlantic College tried to use the house as a female dormitory, but was unsuccessful due to these paranormal disturbances. Now in 1980, the city of West Palm Beach wanted to tear down Riddle House. It had been abandoned for years now and was falling apart. John Riddle, Carl Riddle's nephew, thought that the house had historical value and should be saved. A decision was made to move Riddle House to Yesteryear Village, a 10-acre museum showcasing replicated buildings, artifacts, and other items from the early years of Florida. The building was moved and reconstruction began. Afterwards, supernatural activity within the house had increased. Ladders were moved or tipped over, windows were broken, and a carpenter named Steve Carr was hit over the head with a lid from an iron pot that flew across the room. These attacks were blamed on Joseph, the spirit of the worker who had hung himself in the attic, and men were no longer encouraged to go into the house because of these vicious attacks. And after a 6-month break in the reconstruction process, the Riddle House was finally restored. On that day, the public was able to enter the house for the first time, and it's said that a couple dressed in early 20th century clothing was seen walking through Yesteryear Village. Guests assumed them to be workers in period costume, but when pictures of Riddle House in its original location were unveiled on a plaque, the same two people were seen in the picture. The Riddle House has gained such a reputation for its ghastly activities. The Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures team investigated it during an all-night lockdown, and during this investigation, they had heard doors slamming, footsteps, and bells ringing. Cold spots, indicating the possible presence of a spirit, were then felt all over the house, and an American flag was knocked over. An electronic voice phenomenon caught the sound of a child's voice in the toy room, and while alone in the attic, one investigator had a large bird cage knocked over behind him. The Florida Ghost team also then investigated Riddle House, but felt that they did not come up with conclusive results despite hearing footsteps and having strong electromagnetic field detector readings where the hanging took place. The Riddle House remains an extremely dynamic location when it comes to paranormal activity. Workers have their hair pulled, lights frequently turn on and off, furniture moves, and American flags disappear from closets. Music from the 1920s can be heard in the attic, and voices are often heard in the child's room. Workers now warn the house's entities before they enter the house because of fear of attack. If you guys enjoy this episode, be sure to go ahead and slap that like button and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought. Also, if you're new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and keep your notifications turned on so that way YouTube will let you know every time I release a great new episode. As always guys, stay safe, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the next episode.